Last week, I received this message from a buyer. I don't understand why you want so much for this piece. I'm trying to complete my toy for my 4-year-old little boy's birthday. Before I answered her back, I went into my offer history on this item, and sure enough, she had sent me an offer for $10 on a $50 item that I had listed. So why am I selling this item for so much? Should I consider taking her offer? Well, if you sell on eBay, you're going to receive messages and offers like this fairly frequently. And in today's video, I'm going to share my exact strategy I use when I receive offers. How I know when to accept an offer, how do I know when to decline an offer, and how I know when to counter an offer. I'm also going to share my set of rules that I use to help me remove emotion from making these decisions, which has led to an overall increase in my sales. Now, I want to get this out of the way before we dive further in. I have offers turned on almost all of the items that I have listed on eBay. Offers account for almost 40% of my overall sales on the eBay platform. For me, it's a no-brainer to have these offers turned on. It helps me increase my sale conversion rate. And just like at yard sales, eBay is a place that is known where you can negotiate prices. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether I have offers turned on or turned off. If someone sends me an offer and I don't like the offer, or I'm not willing to sell it at that price, I can just decline the offer and move on. So for me, there's really no disadvantage to having offers turned on other than it takes a little bit of attention and a little bit of effort. However, the rules that I've implemented help me make these decisions quickly without getting too emotionally involved in it. Whether you allow offers or you don't allow offers, let me know down in the comments and tell me why you allow offers or don't allow offers. Share your experiences that have led you to make the decision whether to turn offers on or turn offers off. So before I answered her back about why my item was priced the way it was priced, I wanted to do some quick research first. I always do this when I receive these kinds of messages or when I receive a few offers that are lower than I was expecting. What I want to search for and check out is make sure that my pricing is still competitive. Markets shift, items go up and down in value, and customer trends change. So I want to make sure that my item is priced correctly. So on this particular item, just as I would with any other item, I go on and I look to see what is currently listed. Now, this item is actually a very rare collectible toy from the 90s. And I have the only one listed on the eBay platform. There's no other listings, hence the reason she's messaging me and not just buying one that's on there for $10. I then go to the sold comps. When I look at the sold comps, I can see that there were 2 sold in the last 90 days. Both of these sold around the $50 mark. So now I know that my prices are competitive. Not only do I have the only one on the eBay platform, but my price is also very competitive to the 2 that have sold within the past 90 days. I do this to remove the emotion because sometimes you might get wrapped up and say, I know what it's worth, I paid this much for it. Whatever you paid for the item doesn't really matter. If the market isn't paying the same price that you thought it would sell for when you picked the item up, then you might have to adjust your prices. So I try to remove the emotions, and if I get lowball offers, especially a few lowball offers, or even a message from someone saying, hey, why is this item priced so high? I want to go back in and do that research. It doesn't mean that the buyer is always right, but it's a telltale sign that maybe your item is priced a little bit above market and you want to go in and check those prices. There's no point in getting emotional about this. Just because someone sends you a lowball offer doesn't mean that you have to change your price. It just means that you should go in and check and verify that you priced your item correctly. You could have made an error when listing the item, or the market might have just shifted. Okay, so now that I know my item is priced appropriately for the market, what I want to do next is go on and see what the buyer's history looks like. So for me, this means looking at their reviews. Unfortunately, we can't leave negative reviews for buyers. So typically they won't have any negative feedback. However, there is something that I like to check, and it's feedback left for others. So the easiest way to do this is you go to the message or the offer and you click on the person's name. It's going to bring up their profile. If you click on feedback, it's going to bring up some numbers here. Here I can see all the feedback that she has received. Now, once again, I'm not expecting to see any negative feedback unless she's maybe sold some items. The next thing I'm going to do is click on one of the numbers. So under positive, she has 13 positive reviews, so I'm going to click on the number 13. This is going to bring up her whole feedback profile. Once I'm on here, I'm just going to scroll down, and there's a few different settings here. All received feedback, received as a buyer, received as a seller, and left for others. When I'm checking out potential buyers, I'm looking for the left for others. Now, this particular buyer didn't actually have any feedback left for others, which just means that she doesn't typically leave feedback for sellers, which for me isn't really a problem. It just means that she's not going to leave me any feedback. However, what I am looking for is a pattern with the buyer leaving either negative feedback for sellers or even positive feedback where they're complaining or thanking the seller for offering a partial refund. Now, I don't do this for every offer that I receive. It would take way too long. However, if I'm questioning whether I want to sell it to this person, so they sent me a message like this and the message was a little bit off-putting, so I'm asking myself, is this really someone that I want to sell the item to? Or if it's a super expensive item and the person sends me an offer, I might want to check their feedback to see if there's some kind of level of scamming going on here, or the buyer just has a history of complaining. So there was a buyer that had bought a keyboard from me. When he received the keyboard, he claimed that it didn't work and he asked me to refund him. I told him I would refund him if he sent the item back. We went back and forth. He eventually threatened to leave negative feedback if I didn't give him the refund. He ended up refusing to send the item back and leaving negative feedback. Eventually, eBay did remove this negative feedback because the buyer opened a return request but never ended up sending it back, so it automatically got removed. However, this buyer did just buy the item outright. However, if he had sent me an offer on the item and I had looked at his feedback before, I would have known that this buyer was a problem buyer and I would have declined his offer and blocked him. Some of the feedback that this buyer had left other sellers that I could have found out about had he sent me an offer and I had the ability to look at his feedback would have really helped me determine that this was a buyer that I wanted to avoid, that this is a buyer that clearly goes on the eBay platform, buys items, and threatens to leave negative feedback just to get the item for free. I ordered an item from a store, a battery. Upon plugging the battery in, it destroyed my laptop and almost caught fire. I could clearly tell the battery was used, but I didn't know it was that used. I contacted them and they gave me a return slip. And I almost got fined at the post office because the initial shipping didn't have it registered as a lithium battery. The lady at the post office told me it was illegal to ship. So now I am stuck with a fire hazard that I have to pay to dispose of. Now, this might actually be a true thing. This might be a problem that that buyer experienced with a bad seller. However, the thing here is I'm looking for a pattern. I'm looking for a buyer that has complained in multiple reviews, or in this buyer's case, in almost every single review that they've left. I had to return the item, but it was as described. The guy sends me an item in a plastic bag with a paper bag scotch taped around the end. It was a GPU delicate item plastic bag. Then when I tried to mail it back to him with his shipping label, because I'm not even plugging that thing into my PC, he threatens me because I'm not buying a box to mail it back to USPS, won't accept his packaging in this condition, or as a delicate insured electronics. He tells me that I need to buy a box. Nope, figure it out, fella. Did I mention he threatens me? So this was exactly the case that I ran into him. He was complaining that he couldn't ship the keyboard back, that it was too big, that there was no way for him to ship it back. This is someone that gets an item, complains that the item's broken or whatever, and then just complains that their post office is the worst post office in the world and that there's no way for him to send these items back. This has probably worked for him on multiple occasions where he's gotten items for free. So this is one of the reasons why when I'm selling expensive items and I'm getting offers for these items, I take the little bit of extra time, I go on and I check the feedback left for others. Because had this guy sent me an offer on, say, a $1,000 item, and I saw this is a buyer that I'm adding to the block list, and I'm definitely not accepting his offer. The final decision you have to make is what price point are you willing to sell the item at? So if you go on and you've checked your pricing and made sure that your item is priced to market value, and you've gone on and checked to make sure that this buyer isn't a scammer sending you some lowball offer hoping to get the item for free, now you have to determine how much of a discount are you willing to offer the buyer. For me, I determine this when I am creating my listing. When I'm creating my listing, I turn offers on and I put a minimum offer amount. This is the minimum I'm willing to sell the item, so I don't have to receive lowball offers. In fact, the lady that sent me that $10 offer, I never even saw that offer. She sent me an 80% off offer on that item because that item was listed for $50. The only way I was able to see that she had sent that offer was by clicking on the item, going into the offers received, and seeing that it had auto declined. So this buyer in particular had sent the offer, it got auto declined, she got mad about it and sent me a question of asking why I'm selling the item for such a high price. This will occasionally happen, especially if you use auto decline features. If you auto decline and someone thinks that your item's still overpriced, they might still send you a question saying, hey, why are you selling this item for so much money? I will offer you $5. Will you take a $5 offer? And a lot of times you go in and you look at the offers and you'll see that it's been auto declined a few times. I've had it where buyers will send me, say, $5 and it gets auto declined, and then they'll send me $6, it gets auto declined, and then they'll send me $7, it gets auto declined, and then they'll send me a message saying, hey, would you take $8, because they got tired of sending those offers. The way I determine what my minimum is for the auto decline feature is what is the lowest price I would ever be willing to sell this item. In the perfect circumstances, so this buyer is not coming from an ad, this buyer lives next door so I can walk it over to him, and this buyer has great feedback and this item's been sitting on my shelf forever, it's taking up a lot of space, I want to get rid of it. I think of the best case scenario, what is the lowest price point I would ever sell this item at? And that's where I'm going to set it. Anything below that price point, I'm not going to sell it on the eBay platform. If I'm not going to make my minimum amount of profit on the item, I'm not going to go through the hassle of having to ship the item, having to deal with customer service. And to be honest, most of the time, these people that send really low offers are the people that complain the most. So for me, if it's going to sell super low or it's not worth my time, I'm going to pull the item off of eBay and I'm going to sell it another way. I'll either create a lot, I'll sell it at a yard sale, I'll sell it at a swap meet, whatever it takes to sell that item, but I'm not going to go through the hassle of selling a really low dollar item on the eBay platform. So that's why I set some kind of minimum on my offers. So in this case, this buyer had sent me an 80% off offer on the item. She messaged me complaining about my pricing of the item. This is not a customer I want to sell my item to. Now, 90% of the time, I will always counter. If I'm not willing to accept the offer, I'm going to always counter. eBay loves the fact that you keep customers on the platform. And honestly, sometimes I've had people send some pretty lowball offers. I counter back with something more reasonable and they accept the offer and I make the sale. So most of the time, if the person seems genuinely interested in the item and isn't a problem buyer, I'm going to either counter or accept their offer. But in this particular case, this was a buyer that gave me some red flags that I didn't want to deal with. So I actually just sent her a message back saying that it's supply and demand, that this is the only one listed on eBay, that the sold comps are selling for around $50. I included a screenshot of the sold comps selling for $50. And I told her, thank you and have a great day. I then went on and blocked her. This is how I handle these situations. eBay actually tracks how fast sellers respond to buyers' messages. So I always want to respond to a buyer's message. Regardless of what they're saying or whatever, I'll just say, hey, thank you, or have a great day, or whatever, and then I'll go add them to the blocked list. So here's the things I take into consideration when I'm trying to decide whether I should accept an offer or counter an offer. Remember, it's pretty rare for me to actually just go straight out and decline the offer. I'm almost always going to counter an offer unless the buyer's giving me red flags, and then I'll decline it. So the things I'm going to look at are the market price of the item, how long I've had the item, and how large the item is. Did this offer come from a promoted listing? When you receive offers, you'll actually be able to see whether that offer came from a promoted listing. So if you're promoting your items at, say, 10%, and you receive an offer for 10% off, if you sell it to that buyer, you're actually giving them a 20% discount. Now, sure, 10% is going to eBay to find that buyer. However, there's also 10% that you're giving directly to the buyer. Where is the buyer located? How far, how expensive is it going to be to ship this item? And I always check the buyer's feedback left for others section. I want to know, is this buyer someone that leaves negative feedback after they beat you up on the price? So what this actually means is that two buyers could send me the exact same offer, and one of them I might counter or decline, and the other one I might accept. It all just depends on the buyer's history and how the buyer sent the offer. So if buyer one sends me an offer for 10% off, and it came from no promoted listing, and say the buyer lives close to me, I am more likely to accept that offer because I'm going to save money on shipping and I'm saving money by not having to pay that promoted listing fee. Now, the second buyer who maybe lives across the country and his offer's coming from a promoted listing fee, I might be less likely to accept that offer because I know that it's going to cost more to ship it across the country, and because I know that I have to pay that promoted listing to that buyer. So just because I received the same offer from multiple buyers doesn't mean that I'm going to accept them the same way. It all depends on the buyer. Maybe one buyer has a history of leaving great positive feedback and the other buyer has a history of complaining. And that makes making this decision a lot easier. This isn't an exact science and there's no way to exactly know. I just like to have these steps outlined so that when I receive an offer, I can make the decision quickly. If I'm receiving an offer, it typically means that it's within the price point that I'm going to accept, because anything else is going to get automatically declined. So if I'm receiving an offer, it means that I should be considering this offer. The next thing I'm going to look at is see, is this item coming with a promoted ad fee, and where is this item shipping to? If it's close by and there's no promoted ad fee, I'm almost always going to accept it. If it's going across the country and the offer is very low and it came from a promoted ad fee, I might counter that guy. If the item is super expensive, say $500-$600, and I'm receiving an offer from a buyer, I might want to take the extra minute or two, log on to the desktop, and actually check the buyers left for other feedback. Like I said, I don't do that for every single transaction. It would take forever. However, on those high dollar transactions, or if the buyer sends me a message and I'm like, that's kind of a weird message, like I want to dig a little bit deeper into it before I accept their offer, I'm going to go and check that information out. Just like most things on eBay, if you can remove the emotion from making the decision, you will sell more on the platform. If you get offended by people sending you lowball offers, just set up auto decline so you don't ever see those offers. If you're receiving some weird messages from a buyer and you're not sure whether you want to sell the item to the buyer, go and look at their left for other feedback and determine whether this buyer might be a potential bad buyer on the platform. Set up a process in place so that when you receive an offer, you know immediately whether you're going to accept it. Whether that means you accept offers within a general area of you because you save money on shipping, or whether that means you only accept offers when they come in without a promoted ad fee attached to them. Whatever system you decide, it's best to have a system so that when you're receiving offers, you're not guessing, should I accept this? Should I not accept this? When I receive an offer, I gather the information and then I make the decision based on my set of rules. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you're going to love this one. So go ahead and check it out.